20 years ago, nobody expected the Gorillaz to be anything but a gimmick. But to understand how they got here, we need to talk about the background of Damon Albarn and Jamie Hewlett, the Gorillaz puppet masters.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the reasons why we started Gorillaz in the first place, to be honest with you, was that there's a terrible kind of sort of tendency to take yourself a little too seriously in this business.
Britpop is a golden era of UK music that existed briefly in the mid-90s. The big four artists were Blur, Oasis, Pulp and Suede. It was a brighter, catchier alternative rock in reaction to the popularity of the darker lyrical themes of the US-led grunge music.
The sun is gone,
Damon Albarn summed up his attitude in 1993. He said, if punk was about getting rid of hippies, then I'm getting rid of grunge.
Newsweek coined the phrase Cool Britannia just 18 months ago. Everyone agreed that London was the coolest place around. Even the Prime Minister, who borrowed the phrase just in time for his historic election victory.
There was a massive wave of pride sweeping across Britain. It all kicked off around the time we saw Morrissey walking onto stage, holding a Union Jack in Finsbury Park, 1992. 10 months later, a new Manchester band called Oasis began circulating a demo tape, the cover of which had another Union Jack swirling towards the centre as though disappearing down a plunge hole. "It's the greatest flag in the world and it's going down the shitter," explained Liam Gallagher. "We're here to do something about it."
British Blur. You know what I mean? It took them 5 years to get #1, right? It took us fucking 12 months, yeah?
At the height of Britpop's popularity, there was a pretty pointless rivalry between Blur and Oasis that was sparked when Damon Albarn went to Oasis's celebration party. Some might say had just hit #1, and Damon just wanted to go over there and say, "Congratulations, well done." Before he even had a chance, Liam Gallagher went right up into his face and said, #1! And Damon thought to himself, okay, we'll see about that.
I'm a professional cynic, but my heart's not in it.
Blur purposely released Country House on the same day that Oasis released Roll With It. Oasis, being Oasis, decided to hate Blur, and Blur, being Blur, thought it was just a game. But Oasis genuinely did hate Blur.
He's got a bug in his chest, so he needs a lot of rest in the cat.
Britain's most popular pop groups have begun the biggest chart war in 30 years.
Looking back, both of those tracks probably weren't even the best that either band could have done. Ultimately, Graham Coxon was pissed off at Damon for turning this whole thing into a media circus. He said, "We don't need this fake war, this preposterous chart war." And Damon, who didn't even like the song in the first place, was kind of pissed that he released a shit song. He said, "I remember when we finished Country House, I looked at Graham in the eye and said, I don't think we should be doing this." And he said, "No, it's great." And of course, Liam was pissed because Blur won. If this all seems a bit yikes, yeah, it is.
I remember seeing the term Britpop, I think maybe it was the NME, and just having this horrible feeling that it was gonna catch on.
Anderson of Suede now use Britpop's core politics as anachronistically patriarchal and actually borderline toxic. If you look at all the NME front covers for 1995, only 10 featured women and only 2 included people of colour. I'm slightly ashamed that at the time I didn't see it for what it was, a return to a white, male-dominated Britain. Damon Albarn recently commented, "I was never peddling pride. I was writing about how we were being sold an empty dream by embracing the American model." That's not nationalism. All that national pride and Tony Blair's new Labour attachment to Britpop, and even the word Britpop, nothing to do with me whatsoever.
Such a condescending cock, isn't he, you know? Oh fuck, I wrote this album so I could stop American culture coming to Britain. Fucking wanker.
Barely anyone escaped Britpop unscathed. Damon Albarn and Graham Coxon weren't on speaking terms for years. The Gallagher brothers still hate each other to this day, and Jarvis Cocker mooned Michael Jackson live on stage to the ire of the entire music industry. In hindsight, I think mooning Michael Jackson actually aged pretty well.
He's a 20th century boy.
Being a celebrity and having this relationship with the media was part of the reason why a fictional band might appeal to someone like Damon. He could just experiment as much as he wanted with music, and he wouldn't be surrounded by egomaniacs in the band or around the band.
How much is the Gorillaz about Damon? Because a lot of times...
nothing to do with Damon.
Nothing at all? Okay, because I hear a lot of people explaining the concept as, you know, Damon from Blur, it's his project, it's an animated group.
Damon's very famous, so, you know, we tried to play him down as much as possible because at the end of the day, all he really does is play the triangle.
Jamie Hewlett is often neglected. Jamie Hewlett met Damon Albarn in the 90s when he interviewed Blur on behalf of his magazine, Deadline, the home of Hewlett's comic strip Tank Girl. First issue of Tank Girl was published in 1988, almost exactly 1 year after the Prime Minister famously posed in a tank for the media. Yes, that's right, Thatcher was the original Tank Girl.
Tank Girl.
So Tank Girl rides around in a tank, which is her home. Her boyfriend is a mutated kangaroo called Booga. Tank Girl knows that she's in a comic strip and will often complain to Jamie, do I have to spend this episode topless again? By rejecting and offending the common decency of the time, they stumbled into an audience that was hungry for a contemporary, modern comic. Eventually, some movie producers offered Jamie and Alan just a shit ton of money to make a movie, which they, you know, just accepted. They had no input in the movie, which released in '95 to a resounding negative reception.
Ah, shit.
Jamie continued work on a Tank Girl miniseries and opened up an op shop with his girlfriend at the time, Jane Oliver, who was an original member of the Britpop band Elastica. Coincidentally, at the same time, the current lead singer of Elastica was dating Damon Albarn. 18 months later, both these relationships fell apart at the very same time. Jamie and Damon were both sad and in need of a flatmate. They moved in together and did what any lonely bachelor would do and started throwing hedonistic parties in their tiny apartment.
Well, don't leave the door open then.
Fuck, come and have a look at me then.
In the aftermath of these parties, they would be hungover and watch MTV for hours, which is a bit like hell. The story goes that Albarn and Hewlett were watching MTV, complaining that all of the popular music groups were very artificial. Spice Girls, for example, were ruthlessly envisioned by the father and son duo of Heart Management. They were looking for 5 strikingly different girls who would each appeal to a specific demographic. Somehow it occurred to Jamie and Damon that they could create their own made-up band too. But instead of auditioning anyone, Jamie could just draw the band members. They would be cartoons. That night, they wrote their manifesto on a scrap of paper and created the Gorillaz. The Gorillaz, if you don't already know, is a band made of fictional characters. Tootie, Murdoch, Russell, and Noodle. This idea meant, hypothetically, Damon Albarn could be aloof to the media but remain the puppet master behind the music. From 1998 to 2000, Albarn recorded the first Gorillaz album at his newly opened Studio 13 in London and at the Geejam Studios in Jamaica. These sessions would result in the band's first EP, Tomorrow Comes Today, which was released November 27, 2000. These tracks would eventually wind up on their LP, the self-titled Gorillaz.
Jamie, I spent years not explaining myself and just expecting Americans to get it. They didn't. Americans like you to be nice. They like you to explain things clearly. They like to feel that they're, you know, they don't want to feel you know what I mean? They have a real problem with English people to start off with. And the people that do well in America are the ones that go and fucking explain it all, you know, and play the game that they're, you know, what else do I do? No, fuck off, you know.
Damon felt a lot of anxiety leading up to this album's release. He was reluctant to fully embrace the cartoon nature of the group, concerned that the Americans just wouldn't understand it. Because Blur had struggled for years to break into the American audience, to the point where they had just given up on touring the US entirely.
You're gonna be touring the States? No. No?
Gorillaz was unexpectedly a huge success. In the US alone, the first album had outsold the whole of Blur's albums. 2 mega hits from this LP were Clint Eastwood and 19 to 2000. These tracks were insanely popular, and so many kids rushed out to purchase this album based on those 2 music videos alone. But they would find themselves kind of disappointed. Damon Albarn described it as a mutated hip-hop, trip-hop dub sound. Not really something kids could could really get behind.
The song is Clint Eastwood. What kind of a band would make it that difficult for people to know what their song is called? The guy from the company came in and said, all right, it's a parallel universe. And I thought, all right, I'm right there, I'm confused. These guys are not really the band, but they know the animated cartoon characters that are. So if that's clear to you, then jump on board.
This album is way more highly regarded now than it was in 2001. Gorillaz is the definitive side project. Even at its best, it's never more than a divergent one-off stint. In another interview from the same time, you can see that Albarn is pretty frustrated with how the album is being received. That's one of the most frustrating things about bands these days. They do an amazing thing, but then the whole weight of the celebrity and the money destroys it, and they can't come astray from a single hit. And that's part of the reason Jamie and Damon knew that they had to do another album. So everyone understood that the Gorillaz wasn't just a gimmick, and they had to be taken seriously.
What the fuck did you do this for? Wish me luck when that midnight falls. Memories of a past life. Can this be this is our time? Can this be this is our time?
That's really good.
Yeah.
That's really good. Really great.
Something I'd like to draw attention to is Damon's eye for finding new talent. His greatest strength as an artist is his ability to collaborate. Days tells the story of the night. It's a dark pop album made in the shadow of the Iraq War. The album is studded with collaborators like MF Doom, Booty Brown, and although the album was actually pretty well received, critics just still struggled to get it. But to be fair, Crazy Frog definitely didn't help. So now critics acknowledge that, okay, the cartoons aren't just a gimmick, but they're actually a cynical marketing move.
It's there.
Demon Days is as fastidiously packaged and cynically promoted as your average Shania Twain release. If you believe the Gorillaz are genuinely inverting popular culture, you probably also think Apple presents some cool sort of alternative to Microsoft. I think what some reviewers failed to grasp here, the cartoons aren't exactly marketable. They were kind of off-putting, especially as a kid growing up in that era. Sure, some kids in class thought they were cool precisely because of that reason, but you know, the Gorillaz have more in common with Mad Magazine than they do Marvel Comics.
Go back to sleep, honey. Oh.
These days, Demon Days is hailed as iconic, timeless, a modern masterpiece. It's considered to have left an indelible mark on alternative rock. After the production of Demon Days, Hewlett spent a lot of time trying to get a Gorillaz movie off the ground. A Sisyphusian task that has continued to this day. The most recent development is that Netflix is working on a feature-length Gorillaz film, but I will believe it when I see it. The third Gorillaz album finally won over critics. As Pitchfork said, joke's over, Gorillaz are real. When Plastic Beach was released, the Gorillaz were firing on all cylinders. The music was more ambitious, the videos were more cinematic, and it's difficult to behold the entire success of this album just because its expanse covers so many different disciplines.
Some kind of nature. Some kind of nature.
Highlights on this album include Some Kind of Nature, featuring none other than Lou Reed. Rhinestone Eyes is like a tour of a factory assembly line. Stylo, Welcome to the World of the Plastic Beach, On Melancholy Hill are also highlights. There's something exciting and fresh in every song. This album, like all Gorilla projects, has aged like a fine wine.
Up on Melancholy Hill there's a plastic tree.
And the legacy of this album has far exceeded what reviewers predicted at the time. After its release, the Gorillaz went on an insane tour of North America. Before this tour, they had done a bunch of stuff with like hiding behind screens so that when they performed live, they still looked 2D. And then they had this great thing with Madonna where they animated the Gorillaz to perform live on stage with her. But with this tour, they just kind of said, let's just do a normal tour.
You're fun. Chile is fun.
During the tour, Damon wrote a whole follow-up album called The Fall, which was initially released as a download for members of the Gorillaz fan club. However, As the musicians on stage grew more and more numerous, it seemed to Hewlett that the animations took up less and less space. 2 out of the 4 music videos planned for Plastic Beach were scrapped. EMI was unwilling to fund them due to Plastic Beach's underwhelming success. Additionally, the cost of their tour was insane, and Albarn barely made any profit off ticket sales. A combination of these factors led to a hiatus where Jamie and Damon didn't speak for 3 years. During which time Damon would release a solo album and a new project with Blur, The Magic Whip. Jamie, in the meantime, held several art exhibitions and tried to create another film project which ultimately failed. So if you're keeping count, this is the 3rd time that Damon has had a major falling out with one of his peers. He's got a knack for pissing off his mates, it seems. There are points in every relationship where they fall out with people they're close to and then they reconcile, and hopefully, and actually, you know, the relationship's probably in a healthier place as a result of that. Jamie and Damon patched things up in 2014 at one of Damon's solo shows. Albarn had had a bit to drink and wandered up to Jamie and said, "Do you want to do another one?" You'll also be happy to hear Damon has patched things up with Graham Coxon and the Gallagher brothers, although the brothers still hate each other.
All those amazing images that you've got on your shirts and, you know, been part of what we are over the last 20 years. This is the man responsible for that. Jamie!
Since 2017, we've seen an unprecedented amount of Gorillaz activity. They released Humanz, then only a year later in 2018, but now. In 2020, they unveiled the Song Machine, which has since prompted a mass re-evaluation of the Gorillaz' entire discography, including Humanz and the Now, which both received a pretty cold reception from critics at the time, but have aged pretty well in just a few years. Song Machine, however, landed like a meteor.
And it feels like I'm falling
It was hugely successful. It's been a few years since Song Machine came out now, and their new project, Cracker Island, is due for release early next year.
They told themselves to be a cow.
With features from Tame Impala and Stevie Nicks, whose only demand was that she feature in a music video. To me, it seems like Cracker Island is a spiritual sequel to Plastic Beach. And not just because there's a fictional island at the center of both projects. Plastic Beach dealt with the urgent environmental crisis, and Cracker Island seems to be dealing with the escalation of fringe ideologies accelerated by the internet. The Gorillaz is an ever-evolving project. These days, it's the cumulative work of hundreds of people, not just Damon and Jamie, although fundamentally, it hasn't changed since its inception. A cartoon band that provides endless opportunities for collaboration and creativity. Damon and Jamie have talked about maybe one day moving on from the Gorillaz and passing them down to a younger generation. And although it's hard to imagine the Gorillaz without them, I guess that's the whole point.
Trying to hold on to you.
In preparation for this video, I have been listening to all of the Gorillaz albums on repeat. I've got 2 big HomePods at home that make a really nice stereo pair, but they don't compete with these puppies. These are my early production Neurotrue Pros. These are gonna officially launch in November. When you first use these earbuds, they measure your auto acoustic emissions to create a perfect EQ personally tuned to your ears. And they're capable of lossless audio over Bluetooth. I listen to a lot of music on the tram and I don't like to sacrifice any quality. Honest to God, these are the best sounding earbuds I've ever used. If you want to learn more about the Neurotrue Pros, follow the link down below. Thanks for watching, guys. Catch you next time.